Hello and welcome to a new series of interviews on citiesabc.com by me, Dinis Guarda, where I'm hosting some of the leading influencers and personalities in different areas from all over the world. Citiesabc.com is a platform that we created to look at the challenge that we face living in cities, dealing with digital transformation, with the new challenges of technology, and as well different geopolitics and the areas that we are seeing in the lot of transformation in the world. And this podcast and video series is distributed all over the internet. It's fast growing, and we are very pleased to reaching right now over 1 million views in the first actually 2 months, and we are growing quite significantly. We've been actually profiling a lot of different people, both from technologists to directors of companies, CEOs, and today we're going to be touching a new area that we didn't touch so far, that is the legal and the law, and as well the relationships between law and business, and as well talking about India, which is a country continent that I really admire. So we have together with us Rajat Prakash, that is an experienced lawyer with a demonstrated history of working in the world of law and practice industry, and as well it's been the creator and the founder of and managing director of Athena Legal. That is a New Delhi-based company with a network of 200 lawyers across India. And Raja is a skilled industry expert in the areas of law, but as well in negotiation, leadership, and public speaking in the areas of the bridge between law, but as well all the full scope that you have in terms of this, and as well about India. And as well has been educated in the Cardiff University in the UK and the Scindia School of Gwalior. I'm probably I spelled it wrong, but that's this. Welcome to our podcast series, Rajat. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Dennis. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I think I've been interviewing a lot of people from India, and actually we'll have much more because India is actually going to be the second biggest economy in the world. It's already becoming one of the emerging big markets, as well the biggest population on the planet, and as well a fantastic effervescent population, culture, and a lot of different things. So I would like to have a background of yours from where you were born in India, and as well, I think a bit of background on the history, both your personal history, and as well, how do you see the last 20, 30 years around the evolution of India? So if you could contextualize that to start, I think would be really interesting.
So Dennis, my family, it comes from a very humble background, from a small city in a state called Uttar Pradesh. And, from the very time that I remember, I've seen my mother and father, they worked really hard to be where they are today. My mother, she was in the administrative services, and my father, who met with my uncle in 1978 and decided to be a part of his company, he started his career then. And my father's company, the company that he's associated with, has also has a fantastic history, to be honest. They started off with a mere capital of around 20 quid in 1978, and today it is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate in India and one of the top companies in India. So, this is where my journey began, and like my parents have always pushed me to be independent, as they have been all throughout their life. So, at a very young age, like you mentioned, I went to the Scindia school, which is one of the premier boarding schools in India. So at a very young age, I was packed and sent to a boarding school. And I think the journey of being independent that's where it started. From being in the boarding school, it's just a very different way of life, to be honest. And most of your viewers, if they have attended a boarding school, they would agree with me. It could be you learn many things. You learn many things at a very young age. It could be as small as learning how to cook, or as important as making friends with other students from all walks of life. So I finished my schooling, and then I left for Cardiff to pursue my law at the Cardiff Law School. While pursuing my law, I had the opportunity of working with some magic circle firms around in Washington, D.C., in Brussels. And, this gave me a great opportunity of trying to understand how laws in different countries work, what are the different work cultures. I as I mentioned, I did my law from Cardiff, so I had a lot of opportunity of working in England as well, which gave me a completely different perspective altogether. So once I was done with that, I came back to India, and I was fortunate enough to be absorbed with Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, which is one of the top law firms in India. And I started my career with them as a capital markets lawyer. I worked with them for a little over 4 years. And after that, as I mentioned, I come from a business background, and that hunger to do something, to create something, was always there in me. And thus, I decided to quit my job and take a break, to be honest, to decide what is it that I wanted to do. So this is a very interesting story because, once I left and I was taking a break, I really did, and I'm sure that happens with everyone who is starting their entrepreneurial journey, there is too much of confusion. What is it that you want to do? How should you go forward, or go ahead and do it? And this is when I went to my father for advice. And as I mentioned, he's a part of a billion-dollar conglomerate. So I asked him, I said, what should I do? Should I join the company? Should I try and do something on my own? And there was a whole lot of confusion that I had in my mind. So he gave me a very interesting advice, and he gave it in a context. So he said, you got to look at this company as a massive tree, and you're only a sapling right now. Now it depends, where do you want to plant yourself? Do you want to plant yourself right underneath it? It's going to be comfortable. The big tree, it's going to protect you from maybe a storm. It's going to provide to you, and it's just going to be comfortable. But do you want? And if you place yourself a little outside, well, you got to fend for yourself. You got to fight for the sunlight. You got to fight for the nutrients and water that you get from the ground. You got to fend for yourself from that storm, and but that's going to make your roots stronger. So he left me with that advice, and very honestly, I did not sleep that entire night. But in the morning, I think I had much more clarity, and that's when in 2012 I decided to start this law firm, Athena Legal, and here we are. It's been 8 years that we've been running the firm.
It's quite impressive as well, because it went from 200 lawyers, and I know that how difficult it is to run a law firm. And I think it's key for our days as well, because the business and law is particularly important. So I would like to have a touch in your experience. So from studying law in the UK and then going to India and then as well working in Washington. So a bit of the geopolitical work that you've been doing, I think the difference, because I know that doing law in the UK is completely different from doing law in India. And of course, this is a platform about cities, and as well, each city has the nuances, the cultural, the business nuances. I know that New Delhi, for instance, is much more aggressive than if you go to south of India, and much more as well business focused. When you go in the US, you have even completely different ways. So I think that background is particularly interesting for someone that studied in India, then in the UK, but as well as the US experience, and now come back and building a big law firm, and as well a group in India. So a bit of that context, I think, is particularly interesting.
So it's very different from when the first time that I worked as a paralegal in London. Now that was a very different experience, because the courts there function in a different fashion. The barristers function in a different they function in a different way. And when I went to Washington, now that was a different ball game altogether. The work culture was completely different. It was. I'll tell you an instance where. So I was based in Washington, but we were doing some work with the Los Angeles office, and because of the time difference, but I used to be in the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, which was too early for Los Angeles, and they used to come after 2 hours. So one day my boss walks in and he's like, "What are you doing here at 9 o'clock in the morning?" And what I told him was, "This is the office timing, and I'm supposed to be in the office, right?" And he's like, "No, you're not supposed to be in the office if you don't have work. Why don't you go outside, do whatever you like, but just be here and finish your work on time? That's all I want from you." So now that was a different work culture in the US from Brussels, which was again completely different. Although the work that I was also doing, we were doing a lot of work with the European Union. So, it was more to do with the European Union timings than the law firms. But that was different. When I came to India and I started my career here, I still remember the first day in office. I left office at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd reached the office at 9 o'clock and I left at about 4 o'clock in the morning because the work culture here is completely different. And, it was a lot of work, but I mean, the amount of midnight oils we burned in India, I don't think so. I had to do that anywhere else, to be honest.
A lot of nuances and differences, and I think as well one of the things, especially I have a lot of friends from India and as well some business partners, is that things in India take years to happen. And I think this is particularly interesting because as India becomes it's already a leading global economy, but it becomes bigger and bigger. It's going to be difficult because doing business in India is completely different from doing business in any place in the world. So can you tell us a bit about that, especially someone that was educated in the UK, but you grew up there. But I know that first I had a business partner and as well a thought leader that I was talking, and he said, you have to think about India like an elephant that goes in a rhythm and it takes years to achieve its results. But you have to think in a business minimum 3 to 5 years to do something. I don't know if it's right or not, but it made me think a lot. And I would like to hear your input on that, especially as a lawyer, because I'm sure that when you do a contract, you need to think long term and you think different terms in terms of time, in terms of the way. But I think this is particularly important for business and for technology companies that are trying to do work in India. And first, I know that Microsoft, although it has an Indian CEO, fails systematically to do business in India. So I would like to have your opinion on that.
See, doing business, I think, depends a lot on the geography. And, every geography that you look at has different culture and a different style of working. So, I won't say one is better or one is wrong. But yes, when you say that, I agree that, doing business in India used to be, in fact, I won't say is now, it used to be a very difficult task. But, and this is, you have to give the credit to the present government who has made immense changes. I mean, registering a company in India, it used to take over a month initially. And now that can be done in less than 3 days. So it's the government who has taken a lot of steps. They've eased a lot of norms, and it has. I mean, if you look at it now, I think it has become much easier to do business in India than it was ever before.
No, very interesting. So and for instance, let's say someone that goes from outside India and wants to invest in India, or wants to do business in India. From your experience as a lawyer, and as well, like you said, there's a big revolution right now that is faster to do a business, but it's still difficult to make transfers. I work with a big global organization that could not pay their employees in India because of payments and things like that. So what are the nuances? The devil's on details. And I think especially when it comes to business, is a lot of these details that makes a successful business. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because I think especially for people like me, they want to do more business in India and they want to explore. And of course, I think everyone doesn't do business with 1.4 billion people, or it will be even bigger. I don't think anyone is not interested in that, but people are apprehensive, and of course they don't know what to do. And on the other hand, I think everyone in the world is somehow working with India, from software development, right, for a lot of different things. So can you tell us a bit about that, and as well your experience as a law firm, but as well you have been writing as well some of these things, and I want to touch that a bit after.
See, I understand there are a lot of regulatory approvals that you need to go through when you're coming to India. But that in the recent past has been eased by the government. I mean, today, wherein, if a foreign company wanted to come and invest in India, wherein the approval used to take almost a year, that process has now been made into an automatic route, wherein in most of the sectors, to be honest, wherein foreign companies can come and invest with Indian companies. They can come and do a joint venture. In fact, in my experience, we have in the past, probably before March, But in the past 1 year, we did about 4 to 5 different joint ventures with some Korean companies and an Indian company. And we never faced any such problems. Like I said, it was very different, but things have changed rapidly because even, I think the government also understands that to bring India on the forefront, first thing that needs to be done is, these processes or these approvals, they need to be made easy, which in turn will give confidence to the companies from out of India to come here and invest.
It's a big change, and actually, I'm glad to hear that because I know that is something that the perception is still not like that. So I think you guys have to work that internationally because the perception is still that things are very slow and sometimes very complex as well. So that's very good.
Yeah, I would invite you. I would invite you to come and see that the change is tremendous.
No, I'm
And
very happy, and for sure that will make me even feel more comfortable to work and invest in India and do a lot of other things. So I'm glad to hear that, and I'm very happy as well that things are changing in a very good way. So picking on that, and I think going to one of the things that I saw actually a couple of things on you is the particular dimensions of law and all the transformations that are going through the law world. I know that it's a very fast changing world, and I think we have a lot of complexity because in one end we have the business, and I think actually I have this. It's part of the reason why we create Cities ABC is that we have a big challenge right now in terms of first of all the paper economy and the digital economy. And I think what I mentioned about this is that, for instance, most of the contracts are still paper, and even the bank contracts, you still have to have paper to create a bank account, to manage things. And especially if you do a contract, you can use DocuSign, but most of people still sign. You still have to go through a lot of paper trial. And as well as we're getting to digital transformation, fourth industrial revolution, and as well all the areas of blockchain that brings to the economy is bringing a lot of new possibilities. But the reality is that, and I think the COVID-19 is kind of putting this very clear, that the requirements and acceleration of digital transformation are important, and they will make a lot of improvements and a lot of actually optimization, and it can actually create a lot of much more economical goals, but we're still not there. And there's a lot of work to be done. And I think the fact that a huge part of the world economy is collapsing with COVID-19 just shows that. So I know that India is not so affected as some other countries, but still we have some challenges. So from your experience in this part of digital transformation and the legal world, how do you see that? I know that you've been writing about data and compliance, but just a bit before we go there, and I want to touch in one article that I found from you that I'm particularly interested to listen, but just the digital transformation from the law and the business and this kind of nuances that you've been seeing probably progressing, and you just touched part on that.
In the past 6 years or so, there has been a digital revolution in India. India was one of the first countries that started advocating to move into digital currency, and wallets or cards, making digital payments rather than cash, and which has been a great success in India. So that shows that we are getting there. We have started getting there. Of course, I'm not saying that we are there yet. It's going to take some time, and that is not just in the field of finance, for example. It is going to be in every field. If I talk about legal today, initially till now there was no concept of e-court, or there was no concept of e-filings in the courts. But now, because of this pandemic, we had to transform. The legal industry had to transform. Today, the courts are having the court hearings are being conducted on like we're chatting right now. So they're being conducted through video conferencing, and the filing of documents are being done by e-filings. So that is a change that we are seeing now. There is still a lot of scope. Today, like you mentioned, I would limit it to the legal aspect of it. If you see, there are so many, you must have seen, the legal files are huge, and there is so much of paper that is filed every day in the court. Today there's a massive opportunity there if we can probably connect it something with a blockchain, and digitalize all these records. The government has already started digitalizing their records, but I think in the legal aspect, the courts have a long way to go there to digitalize their records. The e-filings that we're doing right now, that can continue going further, and that's a good practice.
No, that's amazing, and I think it's really impressive that the things are going in that direction, because it's that shows that then you are prepared for the next changes that we're going to be facing in the world. So I want to touch right now in terms of data, and I know that, for instance, in Europe we have the ESG, the areas of the data protection laws, and I think, for instance, in China things are very centralized around the government. Can you tell us, in terms of law of data in India, how does it work? Because you're becoming right now the biggest data providers in the world, but as well you have a huge amount of software being developed in India. So a bit of background, how do you see that part?
So data protection, it is at a very nascent stage in India. And, with this digital revolution that's happening is when, how it happens is when some innovation is done. And after that, of course, the laws also need to innovate along with that. So there was no data protection law in India. I mean, we still have a bill that has been pending in the parliament for data privacy, and it is more on the lines of the GDPR guidelines of the European Union, wherein protecting one's personal data and how it taking consent, for example, of how it needs to be utilized. So that's happening now, and the government of India is very clear on this, that the data of the Indian citizens, that needs to be stored in India and not outside on a server. So the steps are being taken, and very soon, hopefully, we'll see a much more more rigorous laws when it comes to data protection and data privacy.
So that's very big, and that's a big breakthrough as well. Especially bearing in mind that India right now has a huge amount of software companies, and as well a lot of things that break between India and the rest of the world. And I think India as well, if you compare in terms of geopolitics, has a much more positive, being a democracy, and as well very, of course, there's challenge like in any country, but it's much more open to a lot of different things. So how do you see this relationship between the evolution of the legal world and the technology that is coming to that? So you're seeing more and more that you're going to have like DocuSign smart contract driven contracts that people can go to websites and can actually manage that, or are we going still? For instance, one of the things that I'm particularly interested is when it comes to cities. Let's say if you have a property, you have to have the property paper, then you have to confirm, and sometimes it's a nightmare because in a lot of countries, people, let's say if you don't have a proper property registration, it's a completely nightmare. But there's a lot of software that is quite easy to do, but most of the countries are still not using. So are you doing something on that in India, and what are your views as well on this at large?
See, initially, like you talked about property, so I'll start with that. Initially, digitalization of these records were not available. But now each and every document is digitalized and recorded. So that has already started happening in India. As far as smart contracts are concerned, we're not there yet. We're not doing it because, the legal industry needs to evolve for that. We are still very comfortable with sitting in front of each other rather than having a video conferencing. But that is evolving, and it is evolving at a tremendous rate. So going forward, we will see, and there is a lot of scope in, maybe smart contracts using, blockchain technology. So there's a lot of scope for it, but presently, it is at a very, very nascent stage.
No, completely. So I think picking in one of the articles I found that you wrote about data protection, compliance, and data fiduciaries. I'm particularly interested to understand your views on this, because this is a big area. So when it comes to compliance, because there's the financial data, we are as well, like you mentioned, wallets and financial transactions. There's our healthcare data, and I know that India has been trying to do some breakthrough in terms of healthcare data, but this is massive from a legal perspective, and I'm sure you'll open a lot of business for you guys, but it's still very kind of Wild West. There's still not conventional data about this, and a lot of complications, and there's well a lot of and clarity about this. So if you could bring a bit of insights on that, I would looking forward to hear about your views and understanding what you write about this.
Yeah, it's like I said, once the data protection laws are back in place, is only when we'll get more clarity on this topic. Because a lack of data protection and data privacy laws, that is a major issue. I mean, even to the smallest thing as taking consent from the user to use that data. I mean, there are many companies who probably resort to unethical means of collecting and selling data, but that needs to be curbed and will only be curbed when the laws are in place.
And Chris, do you see that we're still very far away from that? Because one of the challenges I've been finding out working with some governments and with a lot of partners around the world in technology and the relationship between law firms or even the biggest companies of compliance in the world, and then the governments and local governments. And one of the things I feel is the lack of education on the technology side. Of course, a lot of politicians are lawyers, but there's a lot of knowledge about technology, although we all using technology. So how do you see that part, especially being a lawyer and as well working with a lot of different parts of India?
When we started the law firm, I introduced video conferencing in my law firm, and I used to encourage all my clients to, rather than me traveling to their office or them coming to mine, I said, why don't we do it on video conferencing? And there was a lot of resistance, let me tell you that. So, but like I said, today with the pandemic, there is no other way of communicating with each other. So going forward, we evolved from there. I mean, as much as I encouraged everyone, nobody wanted to use it. And now we don't have any other choice. So use of technology is increasing by the day. And, all the businesses slowly, steadily are going online. Like, even if today you want to talk about any of the restaurants, they have moved more towards, an online ordering rather than the restaurants going to a restaurant and ordering itself. So it has taken a massive change all across in every aspect of, in any business, you would say. And technology can play a big role for, providing the best sort of, you need less man hours. You don't need that many people working. It's very cost effective, and it can provide you a lot of solutions. I mean, just data generation from, if a company just concentrates on data generation, they can actually define how the production goes, because that data generation and that data aggregation helps them in quantifying of what product is selling, what isn't. So it helps them in a lot of planning. And that we are seeing that happening in India. It's it was growing at a little slow pace, I would say, but in the past few years, it's just skyrocketed.
My question is, so at the moment, world authorities and researchers like Professor Harari, in the 20 lessons for the 20th century, one of the things he mentioned is that we're going to have, in the next 10, 20 years, a new kind of colonization. We're going to have countries that will colonize other countries because of data and because of the way they look at digital transformation and different areas. So, of course, this will happen a lot because of the data ownership and the way you work with data. So as a lawyer and as well an expert in these areas, how do you see this, and as well specifically in the case of India?
I think, Dinis, we'll have to edit this, as I'm not I have my partners who are expert on this. So yeah.
No worries. Okay, so I think then we'll go for another one.
Sure.
So yeah, and in terms of the relationships that you are building, and I think coming back to international companies, special technology companies, they want to build software in India, want to hire in India, or even build joint ventures. What would be the suggestions that you give, even companies and even people like me that want to work more with Indian organizations and so forth?
The most important thing as a suggestion that I would give to any foreign company who's looking to enter into India is, whenever you're getting into a joint venture, please do a diligence on the Indian partner, because because of one bad fish, everybody should not be treated in the same category. So this has happened before. A lot of companies came in without a diligence, and they came into India. Their investments got stuck, and after that they said it's not a good market. We don't want to be here. So the first and the foremost important is that you need to do a complete diligence on the Indian partner that you are going ahead with. Secondly, if you look at it, what is more important is you need to be well versed with what are the regulations. Because again, a lot of times we've seen companies who are interested in coming to India, but once they come in and they say, oh, we did not know about this particular regulation, and now what do we do? So they get stuck there. So a complete diligence has to be done before you enter. And you need to be well versed with the policies. I mean, lawyers and law firms are there to help you out with that. So you need to be well versed with the policies, how to go about it. And you need to be certain of, it's not just in India that the political scenarios change and, the regulations might change. That happens all across the world. But at least if you are well prepared, it is easier, right?
Yeah, no, for preparation, it's my rule of gold is if you fail to prepare, is plan to fail to plan is plan to fail. And I think it's really important, and I think on that level even more. So coming back to India again, and probably wrapping up the interview. So in terms of the law world and specifically your company, can you give us a bit of an overview about what services? And I know that you have 200 lawyers, and how did you build your law firm, and as well some of the specialties that you have within your company and your organization?
When I started the law firm, so again, it's like with any entrepreneur, the fear of the unknown. I did not know what is going to happen, how is it going to happen, and I consulted a very senior lawyer who was running a very successful law firm in India, and he gave me a very interesting advice. He said, you're lucky that you have one anchor client, but remember this, that for the next 3 years, there may be days, weeks, months that you will not receive any work. Nobody is going to take you seriously, and you just got to survive in the market. You're a new entrant in this big world, and you just need to survive in the market. So that's how the journey of Athena Legal started. What I wanted to do initially was, and when you think about law, dispute resolution is what is law. Rest of the things, they follow. I mean, if we get into a contract and if any one of us breaches the contract, where do we go? We go into dispute resolution. So the first thing I decided to build was a robust dispute resolution practice. And I must say today we have one of our primary verticals is dispute resolution, and we've been advising the biggest names in India. And so once this particular vertical was in place is when we ventured into, as myself, I'm a corporate lawyer. So then we ventured into corporate law and intellectual property rights. So these are essentially the three areas that the law firm deals with.
So I want to touch the litigation and the IP law. So on the litigation, I think this is critical for business. And like you said, if you do a lot of diligence, probably you avoid a lot of litigation going forward. Yeah. And if you plan things right. So do you have any suggestions from a legal perspective, and as well from your experience, that you would suggest, especially when it comes to India, on this preparation, and how can we prepare for that, doing that part and avoiding litigation? Or if you get on that on a business, on the relationships with anything, it might be a city, it might be something. What would be your top level suggestions on that, being as well law firm?
The first, because the first thing that you would do is enter into the contract, and the dispute resolution clause needs to be very clearly defined in that contract. Most of the times we've seen, the dispute resolution clause being very vaguely defined. So that is, I think, the primary focus that should be, that if you ever get into dispute, you need to have that resolution clause watertight.
So that's a very summary, very powerful one. So on the other part, you mentioned about IP, intellectual property, and different things. So this is a very blurred territory, because of course there's a lot of software, open source software, a lot of different things, and as well when you build something, it's very subjective. I think this is going to be increasingly more and more difficult, because, for instance, everyone is copying something, and I think understanding where it starts, the original part, and not is critical. And I think especially India, as one of the biggest software developing countries in the world, it's going to be a big challenge, because if I am a company in the UK, for instance, in my case, I have a developing team in India, and then eventually this team can touch with 5 different markets at 5 different jurisdictions. So what would be your suggestion for startups and companies, that is our audience, or even cities? How do you deal with this, and some kind of very concrete nuances?
Dinis, in the intellectual property, we mostly deal with the trademarks. The
Trademarks, yeah.
trademarks,
No, but that
and
is
the
part. I want to
infringement.
touch that part. Yeah, at that part, just top level, of course, because it's not a law interview,
Right.
and I'm not a law expert by any means,
Right.
but I'm interested on that level. Yeah.
So again, for any startup, you need to have your intellectual property right in place. You need to have your trademarks filed. Because we've seen so many companies that come up to us and say, we started using this particular trademark much earlier, but somebody else has got it registered, and now you're stuck because you can't do anything. You need to be diligent again to keep following up with the registry, whether somebody else has filed your trademark, or if you have filed a trademark, as somebody opposed to it, and be proactive to resolve it then and there, rather than face problems later. I mean, we had one of our clients whose company became quite popular, and he did not have his trademarks in place. Later on, we literally had to go and negotiate with the other party to give up. We had to file litigations. We had to go and negotiate with the party for giving up the trademark.
I'm completely with you. I think this is, for me, actually one of the biggest challenge, especially for startups, because you sometimes build a huge intellectual property, and then if you don't trademark it, you can get in serious trouble, and you can lose your entire business in a lot of ways.
No, it's not just startups. To be honest, there are many big companies who, like one of the companies that we advise, and there have been so many issues in relation to trademarks, because the company is into an FMCG space, and it's one of the major FMCG players in India, and they export all across the globe. Now, it was not just, of course, they had all the trademarks in India, but registering those trademarks in the other countries as well. So we had so many instances where, somebody else altogether registered their trademark in that particular country, and then came back demanding a ransom. So it's not just limited to India, but it should be taken like a global view has to be taken. That tomorrow, you have to think about tomorrow. A startup becomes a big company and has trademark issues outside India when they want to expand. That's again a problem for them.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, and I think it's very difficult, because doing trademark in India is different from doing it in the UK, do it in Europe, do it in the US, and I think it's going to be more and more important. So, well, I think I have a lot of questions on the legal side, but probably becomes a law interview. So it's been a fantastic interview. I appreciate your time, and a lot of very specifically advice that I think are great for me and for all our audience. And I'm sure that you're going to be contacting each other in India, because I want to work a lot in India. So I don't know if there's any kind of last thing you want to, just some things in terms of your research, or some advice you want to give to our audience. Our audience is really leaders about like us around the world, people from different areas. If you have a last word to say, and then
we are dealing with this pandemic. We are dealing with these tough times, but every problem comes with its own opportunities. Like you mentioned today, there are so many opportunities in the site, and I think the next decade is all about technology. So there are so many innovations that still haven't been done, that needs to be done, when I talk about my industry, there would be a lot of innovations in terms of legal tech, if you may call it. And I think that there's just tremendous opportunity, and we need to be positive, we need to be safe, and look for some greater opportunities during these problematic times.
No, I love that, and I'm completely with you. And I think it's that's one of the things I actually see as a trend is all the business people and the authors and people from India have a much more positive overview of society than we have actually in Europe or in the US. And I think we need that actually more than ever for the world. So I toast to that. Namaste. And as well, I think it's really it's really important. So I will put links to your company and as well to your profiles. I really appreciate it. And as well, I think to your articles, I think especially this one, which is particularly interesting, the one I mentioned, but as well, I'm sure you have other things. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and
thank you very much.
We'll connect over there in India when we meet. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.